Hello, and welcome back to the Celestial Perch. Today I have a new video. This one will be the beginning or first part of my new player guide. This guide will seek to kind of give new players a basic structure on how to play Stellaris, where to start, and where to go from there. It will track from the beginning of the game, from creating an empire, to the early game, mid game, and late game. And we'll go over plenty of tips and tricks, how to use Stellaris systems, and much, much more. But thank you, and let's get started. Getting started with any game of Stellaris, you will boot up and see this screen, title screen. It will contain new game, multiplayer, load game, credits, settings, and exit. Also several other small buttons down here, which we can avoid for now. You will not be using multiplayer, and if you've never started, you won't have anything in the load game. Credits are pretty self-explanatory, and same with settings. For now, I would recommend that you just look up your computer's hardware and adjust the settings according to whatever you think would work best for your computer and for your own personal preference. But to start a game of Stellaris, we will navigate over here to New Game, and you'll be met with this screen. This screen will show all of the empires that we can select, with the selection screen here displaying which empire we have selected specifically. So scrolling through these, we can see the empires, and it'll give us kind of a brief overview of what that empire is. Also over here on the right, it will show you any and all DLC you have purchased and installed, and DLC you do not. If you do not have the DLC purchased and installed, it will show up without a check mark, and if you do, it will have that check mark adjacent to the icon. The larger expansions will be up here with kind of a circular icon, whereas the smaller species packs and other packs, story packs, will have kind of a more squarish icon. But to start any game of Stellaris, we need to select our empire. You'll notice up here at the top of the screen there is random and create new. I would strongly recommend against using random, as it could random you into either a machine empire, maybe a hive mind, or a mega corporation, something that you're not really going to be able to learn as easy as something like just a standard organic empire. So when you are creating an empire, that's something to keep in mind as well. And also you can see here that all of these, they have a kind of bird adjacent to it. The bird indicates that it was an empire created by me. If you lock the bird, it will force it to spawn, and if you turn it off, it will not allow it to spawn. That's something that you will learn later, but for now, all that indicates is that these are created empires, and these down here are preset empires. For a truly new player, I would recommend one of the preset empires, and within those preset empires, I would maybe steer towards these top two, being the United Nations of Earth and the Commonwealth of Man. Commonwealth of Man being for a player more interested in expansion, early aggression, domination, and United Nations of Earth maybe being something more for a player who's looking to make friends, expand, and just kind of focus on internal politics as well as just economic development. But in case you are interested in creating a new empire, I will also go over that, so we can move on to creating a new empire. So once we select Create New, this will bring up the Create New Empire screen, which we'll press Select to move on, and it will pop up with this screen. This screen will show us our species, our homeworld, our empire, and the currently selected screen will pop up here in the center. In order to create an empire, each one of these has to be selected, and none of them can be in red. They can't be empty, or you have to select something. So for example, let's move through this. First, we have to select a species appearance. We obviously choose avian. Move through one of these. We'll choose one of the nicer looking avians, maybe something similar to my channel even. The lovely bird people. Moving forward, we'll randomly give them a name, the Amari. It's kind of cool. You can also just put in your own name and generate an adjective, as well as give it a biography if we want. And we can change the gender for all of our leaders to be male, female, or indeterminable. Next, we have to give it a name list. Let's move up and give it maybe Avian 3. The name list will just, as it shows here, show us what our leaders will be named, what our planets, fleets, and ships will be named as well. Next, on another more important front, we have to pick our traits. As you can see here, we have points and picks. Each of these has a certain amount of points that are required. Points that will take away from our points will be red. These are beneficial traits. So for example, venerable is 4. If we take that, it will put it to -2, which means we would have to take something to bring it back down to 0. It has to be at least 0 or above for us to proceed. We cannot have negative trait points left. Each trait has a different cost associated with it and a different effect. As it stands, the effects won't mean too much to you. Empire size, unity, leader experience, pop growth speed. Some of these are obviously words that you might understand, but in the context of Stellaris, if you are entirely new, they won't make much sense to you. So, things that will be helpful for you, just my advice on what to pick versus what not to pick. Beneficial perks like rapid breeders, as well as charismatic, and a few others inside here are also pretty good. Traditional can be relatively powerful. Same with adaptive. Any of the natural engineers, physicists, or sociologists. Thrifty, intelligent, industrious, ingenious, and agrarian are also all good picks. For now, we will take rapid breeders. Let's also throw in maybe charismatic. And we need to give our species some negative traits as well. One I would always recommend taking is unruly. I'm not going to go too much into an explanation as to why to take it, just that if you are going to take a negative trait that is -2, it's one of the traits that I would recommend taking, as the negative is not very noticeable and won't impact your gameplay too much. There are a few traits you'll generally want to avoid, these being some traits that are positive but maybe don't have enough of a benefit, stuff like talented, quick learners, strong, nomadic, conformists, venerable, resilient. These are a bit more complex. We'll kind of go over those maybe in a different video. Those are some of the beneficial perks that we might not want to take. In terms of negative perks that we might not want to take, decadent, happiness can be important, so we might want to keep that as something that we don't take. Weak isn't something that most people take. Reducing your worker pop resource output isn't something that's great. Same with quarrelsome. Non-adaptive is pretty bad. And other things that we currently can't take, like slow breeders because we have rapid breeders, and repugnant because we are charismatic, those are also traits that we would not want to take. Now, before we continue on, you'll notice that we still have 2 picks left. So we could take another -2 and a +2, or we could take one -1 and a +1. So for now, I think we'll take sedentary, a relatively unimpactful trait. And I think we can scroll up here, taking maybe natural engineers. That's a relatively powerful trait. If you were to copy this trait by trait, you would have a relatively powerful species. But all in all, this is something that over time will have more of an impact on your gameplay as it stands right now. I just wanted to give you some traits that you could use that would reasonably help you. and wouldn't hinder you too much. Because if you choose the wrong traits or traits that really hurt you, it definitely can make Stellaris just a little bit harder. Let's move on to the homeworld. Looking at the homeworld, you'll be met with this screen where we have planet class, homeworld name, star name, and starting solar system. As well as over here, you will see 9 different starting planets to choose from, each broken down into a category: dry, wet, and frozen. The game will default you always to continental world, which is the center wet world. There are 3 different worlds in each one. So for wet, we have continental, ocean, tropical. For dry, we have desert, arid, and savanna. And for frozen, we have Arctic, alpine, and tundra. Now, these might seem unimportant, at least on a kind of surface level. They don't appear to have any kind of difference aside from climate, where it says wet climate, dry climate, and frozen climate. The game doesn't really do a great job of explaining what that means, but in Stellaris, there are 3 basic resources, being energy, which is kind of like cash, food, which is what you use to feed people, and minerals, being what you use to build districts and buildings. Each one of these planet classes or climates corresponds to a different resource. So dry planets are more likely to have generator districts or available generator districts, which produce you energy. Wet worlds are more likely to have agricultural districts, which produce you food, and frozen worlds are more likely to have mining districts, which produce you minerals. Once we go into the actual first few years of the game, that will make a lot more sense. But for now, I personally like to always choose arid or any of the other dry worlds, as starting with a dry world means we will have more energy districts, or more likely to have more energy districts. And energy, similar to cash or gold in other Paradox games, can be used to purchase any resource. So having more of that is always nice. We'll just for now randomize the homeworld name, Virus Prime, and we'll leave it at a random starting solar system. You can also change to any of the other solar systems. For now, I would always recommend just leaving it at random and not using this until you have a little bit more experience. Moving on, we have the city appearance. City appearance is purely just for aesthetics. There is no difference here. Aside from when you click on your planet, you will see this in the background. So let's use an avian city because we are avian. And next, we will move on to Empire. Probably the longest part of actually creating your species will be your empire. Now we can move on to the actual meat and bones of creating our species, and within that our empire, which would be our government and ethics. This screen is rather complex and is broken out into 3 distinct areas, being our ethics, our authority, and our civics. We will start on the far left here, which are our ethics. You have 3 ethic points to choose, and any fanatic choice, which are the orange ones here, will cost 2, and any regular choice will cost 1. So we can either have 2 and 1, or we could have 1, 1, and 1. It really just depends on your personal preference. The only one I would not recommend, because it will disable the tutorial, would be Gestalt Consciousness. This will turn you basically into a hive mind. I would recommend choosing any selection of these, and maybe straying away from Fanatic, so that you can dip your toes into a few more ethics than just 2. Generally speaking though, for newer players, I would recommend taking stuff like Authoritarian, Xenophile, and maybe something like Materialist as well. All of these are very easy to work with, and will make it easier for you to interact with the AI. Keep in mind that each of these is also on kind of a axis, so you cannot take Materialist and Spiritualist. They are mutually exclusive. This is a cross as well. So fanatic authoritarian does not work with egalitarian, nor does xenophile and xenophobe, materialist, pacifist, militarist, pacifist, materialist, spiritualist, and any of the corresponding just opposite ethics. You can have any number of ethics that are not opposites. So, for example, authoritarian is not opposite of xenophile or materialist, so you can take all three of these. Likewise with xenophobe, authoritarian, and materialist, or xenophobe, egalitarian, materialist. And you can always take fanatic as well. Now, what do these do? They will give you specific benefits as well as restrict you from doing certain things. So, for example, the easiest one to explain would be authoritarian and egalitarian, or maybe even militarist and pacifist. Let's start with that. Militarist will give you extra ship fire rate and claim influence cost. Claims are simply just your empire's claim on another system or another planet. And in claiming something, you can then fight a war in order to take it from them. Ship fire rate just increases the rate at which your ships fire and is a purely militaristic benefit. As well as you can see here in blue above those white modifiers, cannot use no retreat war doctrine. So each of these has small other things that will either restrict you or force you to use certain policies or laws. So for example, authoritarians allow the stratified economy living standards and can enslave aliens. So you can use those, you don't have to, but you can. But you cannot use democratic government forms. So if you take authoritarian, you'll notice that the democratic government form is now locked out. Likewise, if you take egalitarian, the authoritarian government forms are now locked out. You'll notice that as we are doing this, also, the civics are changing. That is because certain civics are locked behind ethics. For now, we'll go back to the ones that I suggested before, being authoritarian, xenophile, and materialist. Each of these will help us 1. Manage our pops and expand, 2. Have increased opinion with other species, as well as give us some extra envoys to manage our neighbors, and 3. Materialist. This will help us with robotic upkeep and research speed, which we will get into once we're in the game. But for now, realistically, any of the ethics can be played with in any kind of pairing. I would just recommend against using Gestalt consciousness. Now, with this pairing of ethics, we have all of these available to us. Within the authorities, we have democratic, oligarchic, dictatorial, imperial, hive mind, machine intelligence, and corporate. But for the authoritarian, xenophile, materialists, we only have either corporate, oligarchic, dictatorial, or imperial. For now, each of these have a specific benefit. I'll go over the 4 basic, being democratic, oligarchic, dictatorial, and imperial. The other 3 are either restricted behind a DLC, such as corporate and mega corporations, or are just a bit too complex for a new player to want to use. So for now, democratic, we hold an election every 10 years. You don't actually get to choose the leader. You can just influence which leader is selected. And they have the automatic resettlement chance. For the minor effects underneath each one, we will go over those at a later point. But for now, the faction unity gain, empire size effect, and max influence from power projection are relatively minor, and we care more so about the frequency at which we elect the leader and how we elect the leader. So democratic, we have no choice in the leader, but we get to influence, and it occurs every 10 years. Oligarchic, we have a choice, but it occurs every 20 years. Dictatorial, we also have a choice, but it's for life. And imperial, we do not have a choice, but it's also for life. The easiest for new players, in my personal experience, has been imperial, as the extra influence here, although I said not super important, and that still holds true. For Imperial, the main benefit is that it is one fewer system to worry about within Stellaris. We simply choose Imperial, we get a leader, and we have a hereditary heir chosen for us at the start of the game. And once our heir dies, or once our leader dies, our heir takes over, and that heir will get a new heir as well. So it's very easy to manage. Well, there's not much to manage at all, and overall, it's still relatively powerful. Moving on, we now have civics to choose from. There are quite a few. I would recommend, if you're interested in choosing some of the best civics, maybe looking up a civic tier list for 3.5.3. If you're looking just for a relatively basic guide, there are also probably some general civic guides out there. But in this case, for a new player guide, I'm going to be recommending some of the more basic civics. And these civics will not impact your gameplay too much, and you will not have to play around them too much. So to start, I will go down and kind of mention each civic that I think is at least worth taking and is relatively easy to use. We will start with cutthroat politics. I'm not going to dive too much into each individual civic, just kind of give a brief overview of what it does, and then move on to the next one. So cutthroat politics, it will reduce our edicts, which we will get into in the game, and it will also improve our code breaking, which is kind of like spying. Overall, sort of nice and easy to manage. Diplomatic corps will give us extra envoys, similar to Xenophile, as well as some extra diplomatic weight. As the name suggests, it's pretty good for diplomacy. Efficient bureaucracy will reduce our administrator upkeep. This one is just kind of a little bit of a savings on our economy. Free haven will give us some extra pop growth from immigration and immigration pull. Functional architecture will give us a little bit of extra building slots, as well as reduce the cost to build them. Relatively nice. Mining guilds will give us one extra miner. Police state will give us extra stability. And lastly, the last few here being Imperial Cult will give us some extra edict funds. Meritocracy is a great way to get some extra specialist resource output. And Nationalistic Zeal is a good way to expand and stay in the fight longer. But really, truthfully, any civic could be taken. There are just some civics that are easier than others to manage. So for this new player guide, I will be taking Police State, as the extra stability will help us manage our planets. And generally speaking, new players struggle with stability, pop happiness, and amenities. So having extra stability to kind of keep us above any negative threshold will be nice. The other thing we'll be taking that I think I forgot to mention actually is mining guilds. Fairly powerful civic, also fairly basic. We get extra minerals from our miners, so a job that produces us minerals will give us one extra mineral per month. Pretty nice overall, and these two civics paired together will give us a little bit of an edge in the early game, a little bit of an economic edge, just in general, and more importantly, are something we do not really have to pay attention to and require a little to no micromanagement. But now we can move on to the remaining few tabs for building a species. Moving on past the government and ethics, the last few things here are primarily just up to you. The advisor voice, you will get additional advisors based upon how many expansions you have. In general, these have little to no impact on actual gameplay, but they can have an impact on how much you enjoy the game. Certain advisors sound quite austere or can be kind of rough on the ears, whereas others are very easy to listen to and never really too grating. So really up to personal preference. I would recommend going through, seeing which one you like the most, or you could just always leave it based upon your government, which we will leave it on authoritarian for now and move on. Our empire name, we can randomize. The Inari combined planet states. Sure, that's fine. Next, we will create our flag. The brown and gray are kind of sad, so maybe we'll give it a slightly different color here. Oof. Maybe something green, and maybe white. Yeah, green and white. And then we can throw in just a random flag here. How about that? Sure. The flag, similar to the advisor voice, I should mention, not something that has a major impact on gameplay, but it can have an impact on how much you enjoy the game. If you're staring at a map for 95% of the game and you don't like the colors that you're looking at, it can be kind of grating. So I recommend choosing something that is pleasing to your eyes and something that will not irritate you too much. Next, ship appearance. This will have little to no impact on the game. You have to zoom into an individual system to look at your ships. So for now, we'll just throw it on a random one, molluscoid. Relatively cool ship set. You can also click through this to look through and see what each individual ship looks like. But for now, we'll just leave it as molluscoid and advance lastly to our ruler. So this will decide if our ruler at the start is female or male. I like the male birds because they kind of look a bit prettier. We'll name him, randomize it, White Wing X-Tac. He's our overlord. We'll change his coloring. Ooh, let's give him a nice red. Change the room as well. Maybe to, this one looks relatively authoritarian. And we'll give him some different clothes. Maybe this one. Relatively simple and nice. And then once you pressed next, it will bring you to your finished screen. This will show you everything that you have for your empire, which authority you've chosen, your civics, your ethics, your species appearance, along with all of their traits, your flag, as well as the background, the city background, your planet, your ship type, as well as your origin. This will give you just kind of a basic overview of everything that you have so far. And now that we have this, we want to move on to the game settings. To move on to the game settings, we simply press done. This will bring us to the game details screen, where we will have a lot of stuff to look through. Now, what I would recommend doing is if you've gone through and maybe changed some stuff at first, simply just press reset to default. This will reset everything back to the default, and we can go through each one individually, kind of give you a good idea of what to select, what to change, and what to leave. For galaxy size, this will mainly be related to the speed of your computer and how powerful your PC is. I would recommend leaving it on medium for anything that's a relatively competent computer. If you have anything older, maybe change it down to small. But even if you have a better computer, leave it on medium, easier to manage. For galaxy size, this is something I could throw up on the screen here, but this is up to your personal preference. Either leave it on elliptical or maybe change it to spiral forearm, something like we have in our galaxy. For AI empires, advanced AI, fallen empire, and marauder empires, I would all leave these as is. If you're looking for a true experience of just learning how the systems work and you don't want to have to deal with the other AI yet, you can turn all of these down just to 1 or 0 and run into nobody. Makes for a very relaxing game. It makes for a very easy game to learn the systems. For tech, habitable worlds, primitive civilizations, and crisis strength, I would leave either all of these at 1, or you can change tech and tradition costs down to 75%. This will mean you'll get through your tech and traditions a bit quicker, and if you don't have maximum or optimum science or unity, which you probably won't, it will help you make it to the late game repeatable techs, or at least allow you to see 90 to 95% of the techs in the game. Leave the rest of these at 1x, being the habitable worlds, primitive civilizations, and crisis strength. At the end of the game, you will face a crisis. I recommend leaving this on random, makes it a bit more fun. And then we have the mid-game start year, the end-game start year, and the victory year. Each one of these will represent when a crisis can occur and when you can end the game. Mid-game start year will let us know that the mid-game crisis can start anytime at 2300. The end-game start year can start anytime at 2400, and we can win the game at 2500. If you have an older PC, you can also change the endgame start or the victory year to be a bit earlier, so that then you don't have to be waiting through the endgame years, as those tend to be the slowest, as they are most impacted by performance. For now, if you have some experience with previous Paradox games, you can leave the difficulty on Cadet. If you don't, and you are a true new player to the 4X genre, Grand Strategy genre, or just Stellaris in general, maybe change it down to Civilian. Leave scaling difficulty off, leave difficulty adjusted AI modifiers off, leave the AI aggressiveness, empire placement, and advanced neighbors all as their default settings. You can also change empire placement to clusters and changed AI aggressiveness to high if maybe you've played a few more games and you're looking for something that can improve your performance, as the AI aggressiveness and the amount of pops in the game directly correlate with the overall performance. But for now, leave all of these at the default. Lastly, we get into some final settings here, being our hyperlane density, our abandoned gateways, our wormhole pairs, and guaranteed habitable worlds. I would recommend leaving all of these at their default settings. And then these are the 3 settings I would recommend changing. We'll want to change Caravaneers to off, L-gates to off, and xenocompatibility to off. L-gates might be a bit of a controversial one, but my personal experience is that losing to the L-gate triggered events can be quite frustrating, especially for a new player, and also the AI pathing due to L-gates can be kind of rough. Caravaneers simply will just reduce the amount of pop-ups you receive, and xenocompatibility will drastically increase your performance. I would recommend turning all of these settings off. Moving on to the logistic growth ceiling and growth required scaling. These all directly relate to how many pops can be put into the game. Changing the logistic growth ceiling and growth required scaling, as it mentions here with the red warning, can have a significant performance and balance implication. And decreasing growth ceiling alongside is highly recommended. So you'll want to change these both accordingly, but for the purpose of a new player, I would leave these both as the default. And lastly, anybody who's experienced with Paradox games will know of Iron Man mode. This will disable cheats and will automatically save the game every month. It will also prevent you from doing as what is colloquially referred to as save scumming, where you can save, take an action, and either reload or continue based upon how the action went. I would recommend leaving Iron Man mode off for your first game, as most players will probably not be trying to cheat or will be not trying to, game the save and load system, as well as it will be hard to know how to do that. So my recommendation is to leave it off, save frequently. The game will still autosave for you, but this will allow you, if you make some critical error or some mistake, or you want to try something differently, to just save and reload. But for now, those are all of the game details before we start, and now we can dive into the actual gameplay.